Picture this. The marble halls of a Roman villa glow faintly at dusk, oil lamps flickering against painted frescoes. From behind thin curtains, you catch whispers. Noblewomen plotting their beauty rituals with slave girls, voices carried on air scented with rose oil, incense, and something sharper, metallic. A senator's wife steps out, her skin painted ghostly white with lead, her lips stained crimson with mercury, her grace hiding the poison slowly killing her. She walks toward her husband's study, every step heavy with customs so alien to us that they feel like nightmares frozen in history. Before we dive into these hidden tales of survival and suffering, if you're fascinated by the forgotten truths of the past, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. And drop a comment. Tell me where in the world you're listening from. I find it incredible that together, across centuries and continents, we're unearthing secrets Rome itself tried to bury. What we call intimacy today, love, marriage, family bonds, personal grooming, meant something entirely different to the Romans. Their rules twisted private life into a system of control, where religion, law, and custom blurred pleasure, pain, and power. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, the ashes of Pompeii did more than preserve walls and bodies. They preserved the secrets Rome whispered only in shadows. Archaeologists uncovered frescoes on bedroom walls, bathhouses with coded hierarchies, and private chambers where power was negotiated in the most intimate ways. Consider pudictia. We translate it as modesty or chastity, but for Roman women, it meant balancing restraint and availability, a balance measured not by personal choice, but by their husband's honor. A senator's wife belonged fully to her husband, yet had to remain utterly inaccessible to all others. Livia Drusilla, wife of Augustus, mastered this so perfectly she became the model of Roman virtue. But behind closed doors, she turned that virtue into power, gathering gossip from slave girls of rival families, proving that in Rome, bedroom secrets could topple governments as surely as armies. Marriage itself was no fairy tale. It was politics. Families calculated alliances, wealth, and heirs. Love was optional. Duty was not. Wedding nights were performances, not private moments. Pliny the Younger once wrote of a bride barely 14, trembling as her aunts prepared her for a man twice her age. The wedding bed, blessed and draped in blood-red fabric, awaited, not for love, but for proof, for honor, for politics. In Rome, sex wasn't defined by male or female, it was defined by power and hierarchy. Citizens, slaves, foreigners, all had different roles carved by law. A free Roman man could exploit slaves or prostitutes without shame, but touching another citizen's wife was treason against the empire itself. In 48 AD, Gaius Silius discovered this truth when he dared to marry Valeria Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius. Both were executed, not for love, not for lust, but because their union threatened imperial power. Slavery made intimacy even darker. Slaves were extensions of their master's body, tools for labor and desire alike. The wealthiest men owned hundreds, chosen for beauty and trained for service beyond the domestic. Behind closed villa doors, gatherings blurred the line between ritual, entertainment, and exploitation. Roman writers hinted at nights where music, poetry, and flesh mingled in ways too dangerous to record openly. Even the bathhouse was no escape. Public baths were Rome's social hubs, but also hunting grounds. Men and women bathed separately, but deals, social and sexual, were struck in the surrounding chambers. Seneca complained of the sounds rising from a bathhouse below his home, weights clanging, flesh slapping under massages, screams from hair removal, and always the whispered negotiations between bathers and attendants, deals made in shadows. Romans obsessed over hair removal, enduring torture for smooth skin. Heated tweezers, waxes of pine resin, pumice stones grinding against flesh. Wealthy households employed slaves whose sole task was depilation. The poet Martial described watching a senator's wife endure the procedure in silence, her skin torn raw, tears falling, yet no sound of pain allowed. To show weakness was to lose honor. And the cost of beauty? Deadly. Roman cosmetics were poison in disguise. White lead for the face, mercury for the lips, luxury that killed slowly, while leaving women trapped in the very image of elegance society demanded. Roman beauty was poison disguised as elegance. Rouge for red cheeks was mixed with mercury, eyeliner with antimony, and white powder with lead. The result? Painted faces glowing like marble statues, while nervous systems collapsed, wombs withered, and lives cut short. Ovid's Ars Amatoria, written in 2 AD, even gave step-by-step recipes for slow death. Mix white lead with vinegar into a paste, smear it thick on your face. For lips, crush cinnabar with rose oil and fat. Line the eyes with antimony and honey. Women followed these instructions faithfully, painting their own coffins stroke by stroke. But cosmetics were only the beginning. Roman women risked even more to control fertility. The most prized was silphium, a plant from Libya, so precious it was stamped on coins and sold for its weight in silver. Taken in small doses, it worked as contraception. Taken in slightly larger ones, it killed. Overdoses were common, and silphium itself was harvested into extinction. Others tried desperate tricks recorded by Cyrannus of Ephesus, inserting wool soaked in honey, vinegar, or resin, drinking potions of copper, rust, or ground beetles, even throwing themselves into violent exercise or deliberate falls. Behind the clinical descriptions lies the truth. These were women gambling with their own lives in a society that gave them no safe choice. Abortions were even worse. Roman law often treated the fetus as part of the mother's body, but the methods were brutal. Toxic herbs like pennyroyal and rue poisoned the body as much as the womb. Mechanical procedures with bronze tools caused bleeding, infection, and often death. Pliny the Elder told of one wealthy woman who endured herbs for days, growing weaker until a Greek physician used instruments while her family held her down. She bit leather to muffle her screams. The pregnancy ended, but within days, infection killed her. Her family told neighbors she had died of fever, hiding the truth behind a lie Rome accepted all too easily. Roman sexuality was built on hierarchy, not love. A citizen man could use slaves, prostitutes, or foreigners without question. But to be penetrated himself, even by choice, was shameful, destroying his claim to power. Rumors dogged Julius Caesar for life, accusing him of being the Queen of Bithynia for a youthful affair with King Nicomedes. Whether true or not, the whispers wounded his authority more than any battle. Even Emperor Hadrian scandalized Rome not for loving Antinous, the beautiful youth, but for loving him too openly. When Antinous drowned, Hadrian's grief led him to deify the boy, build a city in his name. To Romans, this wasn't holy, it was weakness. To love too deeply meant surrendering power. Prostitution, by contrast, was accepted and taxed. Brothels lined Pompeii's narrow streets, their cubicles barely wide enough for a bed. Frescoes on the walls displayed acts like a menu. Graffiti scrawled by clients mixing crude insults with genuine affection. One carving still reads, "Restituta, you move your hips so sweetly." Even in commercial exchange, humanity sometimes flickered. In Rome's Subura district, senators and priests slipped into taverns in disguise, hiding their rings, trading togas for rough tunics. By dawn, they returned to their villas, ready to preach virtue as though the night had belonged to another world entirely. Even marriage was codified like a contract, stripped of romance. Papyrus and bronze tablets preserved clauses that read like cold business terms. One contract from 134 AD ordered, "The wife shall submit to her husband's desires at least twice each week unless prevented by illness or ritual." Refusal carried financial penalties, deducted from her dowry. On the wedding night, rituals bound the bride to duty, not affection. She was carried across the threshold, dressed in a saffron gown, her hair arranged with a gladiator's spear to symbolize childbirth's coming pain. Catullus, writing in the 1st century BC, described a bride weeping as older women stripped away her childhood clothes, painting her face with sacred clay, binding her hair with ribbons. She did not cry for leaving her parents. She cried because she knew she was no longer a child. The Roman wedding night was not about love. It was about fear and duty. Picture a trembling young bride, barely past childhood, her face painted, her hair bound with ribbons, while her mother and aunts whisper instructions she can hardly understand. In the next room, her husband drinks wine with his male relatives, who give him crude advice about the duties he must perform before dawn. For her, it is terror of the unknown. For him, it is the first step into manhood. Two lives joined not by affection, but by family ambition and political strategy. Divorce, too, was a stage for power. Among the Roman elite, either husband or wife could end a marriage with a simple declaration, but the consequences were never equal. A man could divorce, remarry, and move on without scandal. A woman who dared to do the same faced disgrace, loss of children, and financial ruin. Emperor Augustus tried to control this chaos with laws that forced men to marry and punished bachelors. Instead, Rome found ways around the rules. Fake marriages, sham unions with foreigners who vanished into distant provinces, slave brides freed after a single night. Law gave order on paper, but in reality, Roman passion always found its loopholes. Festivals revealed the rawest face of Roman sexuality. Every spring, the Floralia exploded in the streets of Rome, a celebration for the goddess Flora, where naked dancers filled the theaters and performers coupled openly on stage to bless fertility. Senators sat beside slaves, prostitutes danced beside matrons, and the same citizens who condemned such acts in their homes shouted with joy in public. Martial wrote of the crowd's wild abandon as music played hymns to the gods while bodies moved in ways that blurred worship with spectacle. Respectable women stayed away, but for prostitutes and slaves, it was their moment of freedom, a sacred theater of shamelessness. Roman medicine mixed observation with prejudice. Galen and Serranus described human bodies with precision, but twisted their findings to fit Roman hierarchy. They believed women needed pleasure to conceive, yet warned that too much passion made them dangerous, immoral, uncontrollable. Midwives were instructed to ask if a woman had enjoyed conception. If not, birth would be harder. Passion was medicine, duty was poison. Women who conceived in fear or rape, they claimed, would bleed longer, labor harder, and risk death. These texts reveal not science, but a society where even reproduction was measured by power, not compassion.
Education in sexuality began early and brutally. Boys were taught by tutors, relatives, and by slaves they were expected to use. Girls were trained by mothers and matrons, not for choice or joy, but for silence and endurance. At 16, boys donned the toga virilis, offering sacrifices to household gods, publicly declaring their manhood. Behind closed doors, many were taken to brothels or slaves arranged for them, rituals of power disguised as education. Manhood was measured not by wisdom, but by conquest of bodies.
Yet even in this world, poetry revealed the human heart. Catullus sang of his passion for Lesbia, pouring out verses of love, jealousy, and obsession. He adored her wit and brilliance, then turned violent in words when betrayed. His poems remind us that Roman love was never free from Roman power. Tenderness and brutality walked hand in hand, even in verse. The Romans even carried intimacy into death. Tombs of noble couples show husbands and wives reclining together for eternity, the wife's hand resting on her husband's chest. Some chambers went further, decorated with erotic frescoes, filled with objects meant for pleasure in the afterlife.
To Romans, desire did not end with breath. It passed with them into eternity. But Rome was cruel to women who aged. Older men were praised for taking young wives, flaunting vigor. Older women who sought desire were ridiculed. Juvenal mocked them in savage satires. Wrinkled faces painted like brides, sagging bodies draped in silks, chasing gladiators who took their wealth and left them in humiliation. Age was allowed dignity for men, but for women it was painted as desperation. And through it all, slavery remained the darkest shadow. Slaves could not marry, yet they formed bonds of love and loyalty that masters often destroyed at will. Some masters freed beloved companions to marry them, but the imbalance of power never disappeared. Children of slave women belonged not to mothers, but to masters, families broken like pottery. Pliny the Younger once mourned his slave Zosimus, writing, "He was more than a servant to me. He shared my meals, my bed, my secrets. His death left me hollow." He freed the man's son, honored him with a tomb. Yet even in grief, Rome still called Zosimus property.
Marriage in Rome was never just love. It was a contract, bound by rituals that chained women as property. Some unions were sealed by conferatio, sacred ceremonies so elaborate that breaking them was nearly impossible. Others were forged by coemptio, a symbolic purchase where a bride was transferred like land from her father's hand to her husband's. The poorest relied on usus, a year of living together, without the bride leaving for 3 nights in a row, after which she belonged to him by law. Love did not decide marriage. Custom, politics, and power did. Behind these facades, Roman sexuality revealed customs that disturb us even today. Relationships between men and adolescent boys were accepted, even praised, as long as they followed strict social rules. The older man was expected to be teacher and mentor, shaping the boy's mind while claiming his body. Roman writers described these bonds as educational, but the truth is clear. They were built on power, and the scars left behind could never be erased. Petronius, in his Satyricon, confessed the torment of such passion. "His beauty consumed me. I wanted to possess not only his body but his dreams. Yet every gaze from another man filled me with terror." Love became ownership. Tenderness became captivity. Religion, too, was not free of the flesh. Some temples employed sacred prostitutes, women believed to bridge mortals and gods. In the cult of Cybele, priests in frenzied ecstasy castrated themselves, then lived as women devoted to the goddess. Neither fully male nor female, neither free nor enslaved, they stood outside all human categories, their mutilated bodies proof of devotion. In Rome, the boundary between holy ritual and sexual violence was paper-thin. Magic was another battlefield. Archaeologists have uncovered curse tablets whispering desperate pleas. "I bind Gaius Lucius so that he may think only of Claudia, that he cannot eat or sleep until he comes to her bed." Love potions made from herbs, blood, even crushed insects were sold in markets. But medicine, magic, and poison were indistinguishable. A sip meant for attraction could just as easily mean death. Pleasure itself was divided by gender. Roman men were praised for indulging, provided they remained the dominant partner. Women, however, walked a knife's edge. Too much passion marked them as immoral. Too little, and they risked shame for failing to please. Ovid captured the cruelty of this expectation. "She lay beneath me like a statue, showing no pleasure, fearing passion would damn her. Yet when I ceased, she wept, fearing she had failed me." A wife's body was a battlefield between restraint and desire, and she could be destroyed on either side. Slaves bore the worst fate. Their most private lives were controlled, recorded, and bought like livestock. Some masters bred slaves deliberately, choosing pairings for beauty, strength, or intelligence, keeping tablets of children produced. A family could be made or destroyed by a master's will, their love stories erased like chalk. The Roman army carried this darkness across the empire. Soldiers were told to remain celibate in campaigns,
But victory gave license to horrors. Mass rape of conquered women was not a crime. It was a rite of conquest. Caesar himself hinted at this after Alesia. The cries of captives blended with songs of triumph. Rome's glory and Rome's brutality were never separate. They marched together under the same banners. Even the cities of Rome carried sex in their stones. Public baths included private chambers for secret meetings. Roadside inns doubled as brothels. Roads themselves, the arteries of empire, carried not just soldiers and merchants, but prostitutes, slaves, and entertainers following the army's path. Sex in Rome was not hidden. It was infrastructure. And behind it all stood the law, cold and deficient. Laws dictated which acts were permitted, who could touch whom, and what penalties applied. Adultery was fined. Prostitutes were taxed. Brothels enriched the treasury. The empire turned desire into revenue. Vice into empire. For Rome, sex was not sin. It was business.
The theaters of Rome were more than stages. They were arenas of desire. In the upper galleries, far from the spotlight, encounters took place that everyone knew about, but no one dared to name. Even the temples, supposedly the holiest of spaces, sometimes sheltered rituals where worshippers offered their bodies, as if intimacy itself could summon divine favor. Roman art preserved all of this with startling honesty. Frescoes, mosaics, and sculptures showed acts so explicit that by our standards, they would be labeled obscene. Yet in Rome, they decorated dining rooms, courtyards, even bedrooms. These images weren't hidden, they were culture. They reveal a world that celebrated flesh with as much pride as it did conquest. Their philosophers wrestled with these contradictions. The Stoics preached restraint, fearing that pleasure weakened the mind. The Epicureans were more forgiving, but warned that indulgence carried consequences. Marcus Aurelius himself admitted the struggle. The body seeks pleasure as water seeks its level. The mind must be a dam, not to stop it, but to shape its flow. For Rome, desire was never evil, but it was dangerous, a fire that could warm a home or burn it to ash. Medicine in Rome blended knowledge and superstition. Doctors mapped the body, understood reproduction, and even performed surgeries, but their treatments were warped by cultural bias, judging patients not just by their wounds, but by their gender, status, and morality. Even farming was entangled with sex. Manuals instructed couples to time their intimacy with planting seasons, believing human fertility could bless the soil. For Romans, the line between crops and children, field and flesh, was never clear. Entertainment, too, was drenched in eroticism. Gladiatorial games, theater, chariot races, every public spectacle carried undercurrents of lust. Performers doubled as prostitutes, festivals blurred into carnivals of indulgence, and the empire's appetite for spectacle always included the body. Writers like Catullus, Ovid, and Martial left behind poetry that breathed the raw emotions of their world: love, jealousy, desire, betrayal, expressed in words that still cut like knives. Even their tender verses revealed how power invaded intimacy. For in Rome, even love was never equal. It was conquest disguised as affection. Conquered lands absorbed Roman customs and, in turn, infected Rome with their own. From Egypt came fertility cults, from Greece philosophies of passion, from Syria and beyond rituals that merged sex and sanctity. Rome consumed them all, reshaping them into a vast mosaic where power, faith, and the body intertwined. And behind it all, the economy. Sex was not just private desire, but state business. Prostitutes were taxed, brothels regulated, concubinage accepted. Even scandal had a price, filling imperial coffers. The state had no interest in banning indulgence, it had every interest in profiting from it. Sex could raise you or destroy you. A slave of extraordinary beauty might win freedom through the bed of a master. A citizen might lose everything through scandal. Families rose through marriage alliances, and entire bloodlines crumbled under the weight of shame. In Rome, the body itself was currency.
When Pompeii was buried in ash, it preserved not just streets and villas, but secrets. Frescoes still whisper, contracts still bind, skeletons still lie in final positions, frozen witnesses to a civilization where intimacy was never innocent. Those whispers echo across centuries, reminding us of what Rome truly taught, that love has always been tangled with power, that desire has always carried the weight of politics, and that exploitation has always hidden behind custom. Standing in the ruins today, you can almost hear them, the voices of women painted to death by poison cosmetics, the cries of slaves forced to serve in silence, the laughter of senators who turned marriage into a business deal. Rome's legacy is not just law and architecture, it is also the truth that intimacy has never been free from cruelty. And as you walk those marble corridors, remember, the Romans were not monsters, they were human, like us, which means their darkest shadows are not gone. They live on, disguised, reshaped, whispered in different tongues. The ghosts of Rome still walk beside us, reminding us that the line between love and power, between pleasure and pain, has always been thin.